Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Role models play an important part in all of our lives, whether we seek them out or not. And whether we walk the Buddhist path or not, they can have the power to shape the direction we take and the ability to influence the decisions that flow on from there. Life, with its ebbs and flows, challenges and opportunities, and at every turn we often seek wise counsel, examples that we can follow, and emulate people that we can respect or look up to, and much, much more. On the Buddhist path, the Buddha, for all intents and purposes, is our most eminent role model, teacher, and the Perfectly Enlightened One. There are also many noble and great disciples of the Buddha, those who have ordained as well as lay people, who were commended and praised by the Buddha for different qualities and or aspects of their practice. This will be a recurring segment on the podcast where we ask who are our role models and feature some of these great disciples of the Buddha. The aim is to learn about these noble beings and delight in their lives and accomplishments, learn from them, highlight the importance of recognizing them as noteworthy role models, and as inspiration towards the Noble Eightfold Path. Today we're going to look at another of the Buddha's lay disciples, and it's going to be Velukantaki, who is Nanda's mother. She doesn't actually appear on the list of foremost lay followers, but she's often likened to Uttara Nandamata, who was foremost amongst those who practiced the jhanas. Now, in the past, who we've looked at so far is, we've looked at Khujjutara Upasika, who was foremost at being very learned, so Bahusutana. We've also looked at Chitta the householder, who was foremost at speaking on the Dhamma, and this is Dhamma Katikana. And we also looked at Samavati, who we know as Queen Samavati, and she was foremost at dwelling in loving kindness, so Metta Viharinam. And then more recently we've looked at Nakula's parents, so Nakulapita and Nakulamata, and they were foremost at trustworthiness, so that is Visasikana. Where we do find references to Velukantaki, it comes with high praise from the Buddha. She's actually one of the role models the Buddha suggests for female lay followers. And you find this in Ekadita Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 17, discourse number 24. And it's also in two other references in the Anguttara Nikaya. And it basically says, a faithful lay follower, rightly imploring her only daughter, dear and beloved, might implore her thus: Dear, you should become like the female lay followers, Khujjutara and Velukantaki, Nanda's mother. For this is the standard and criterion for my female disciples who are lay followers, that is, Khujjutara, the lay follower, and Velukantaki, Nanda's mother. Now, as we know from our look at Khujjutara, she was Bahusutta, the foremost at being very learned. And as we know, often people misapprehend that Bahusutta, very learned, means knowing a lot. But what we found from looking at the accomplishment in being very learned from the Sekapatipada Sutta is it entails much more than that. That Buddha's learning system means that if you are Bahusutta, you acquire a lot of Buddha's words, but not only that, you memorize them, you retain them, you are able to discuss them, you're able to contemplate them, turn them in your mind, meditate or bhavana, and then if you're very good, you penetrate them, you realize the truth of them. And so Khujjutara was a Sotapanna, but I suspect she was actually more than that by the time she passed away. And rightly so, given her noble qualities. And so what we'll find from the talk today is that Velukantaki has some very astounding qualities herself, and one of which was she was very highly attained. And so this is what we're going to look at today. We don't find a lot of suttas with reference to Velukantaki, but there are two main ones in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses. The first of which is this Nandamata Sutta in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 7, discourse number 53. Now, one evening she was chanting the Parayana, and the Deva King, King Vesavanna, came by, and he actually listened to her chanting, and then afterwards they had a dialogue. So she was able to talk to a Deva. And in the discourse, as they were talking, she was saying she offered the chant that she had just recited to the Deva King. And then he also asked of her and gave her some information that was quite important. He actually told her that the next day Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana and the Sangha were passing through Velukantaki where she lived, and that if she were to prepare dana for them, that she'd dedicate the merits to this young Deva King. So when that happened, the next day she cooked a meal, many delicious dishes, and then she sent a man to the monastery and actually asked him to invite the Sangha to her home. And so the Sangha actually came to her home and she offered the meal. So following the meal, she actually sat with Venerable Sariputta and had this dialogue. Now, when you read the sutta itself, some people may mistakenly think that she's boasting, but in actual fact, she's actually confirming her qualities to Venerable Sariputta, and he is expressing mudita, much joy at her accomplishments as a lay practitioner. And so the first of them is really being able to converse with a deva and being able to dedicate the merits of the almsgiving, the dana that she had given to the Sangha, to the happiness of this great king. So clearly she didn't have any stinginess, any obstructions in her path to offering alms to the Sangha and being able to dedicate all the merits to this Deva King. The second quality that she expressed was that she did not experience any alteration in her mind when her son was wrongly arrested, then imprisoned, and then later killed. And so she was actually expressing that her mind did not shake. And that's a very, very noble quality, because when you think about our children, if something were to happen to them, even if something happened in terms of being accused of something, we would be on the side of our children. We would stand by them. Our mind would literally shake. We would fret and worry and fear and all those sorts of things to varying degrees depending on your practice. But in expressing that, her mind did not change when it came to the process of her son being wrongly accused, then arrested, then imprisoned, and then killed. That is something that is quite remarkable. And so you can see the power of her mind from that. The third thing that she expressed to Venerable Sariputta was that she didn't again experience any alteration in her mind when her husband passed away, and then he was reborn in the Yaka realm, and then he reappeared to her in his previous form, so as her husband. And for us, when we contemplate if a so-called ghost or the reappearance of a departed loved one were to come, we would probably freak out, or at least we would get surprised and alarmed, and our mind would shake. It would probably have this movement where it would question and all kinds of things. And so in Velukantaki's case, her mind did not alter, it did not change, and so she was unshakable by that reappearance of her husband who had already passed. So again, demonstrating the power of her mind, didn't go with the Vedana basically. So in both instances where it came to her son and her husband, her mind didn't shake with Vedana. So there was clearly Phassa in terms of contact with all these things that are quite either shocking or alarming. And so when that happened, she didn't move with the Vedana. So this is what we all practice for. We don't want our minds to shake. That's why we meditate. We don't want to go with the feeling. Because as we know, if vijnana establishes and steadies on either form, feeling, perception, or volitional formations, then it will activate the dependent origination, the paticca samuppada. So what she's actually saying is that she doesn't move with Vedana. She doesn't move with the kapalinkara hara, the form, and neither does she seem to move with the perception and volitional formations. So very powerful practitioner. Now when it comes to the fourth quality, she was saying to Venerable Sariputta that she was married at a young age. So her hand in marriage was given at a very young age. So she married when she was young. And she doesn't recall ever transgressing her husband, even in thought, much less in deed. Now, where have we heard that before? We've heard that also with Nakula Mata, so Nakula's mother. So this is a quality of sila, really, around moral discipline, that through body, speech, and of course not even in thought, so in her mind, did she ever have any transgression. So that literally means that she didn't bear any ill will, she didn't have any sexual misconduct, there were no cruelty thoughts, there were thoughts really of renunciation. So she was actually, the Noble Eightfold Path seems to be coming together for her. You know, when you read this, that her sila was in accord with the Noble Eightfold Path. So again, a very noble quality. You know, when we think about ourselves and our partners or our loved ones, it's very easy for us to transgress in our minds, let alone in our speech. We often can be a little curt, a little harsh, if not more at times. And then with our action as well, when it comes to physical behavior, sometimes we can be a little rude or a little harsh in our physical manifestation, pointing fingers, all kinds of arm gestures, hand gestures, facial expressions, which are not really soft. And so when you think about this noble quality she has, it's something to aspire to actually start to soften, to start to really allow the path to come together and to apply virya, you know, the energy, the effort towards that. Now her fifth quality was, since she was declared a lay follower, or she declared herself a lay follower of the Buddha, she doesn't recall intentionally transgressing any training rule. So again, this is towards the sila, this moral discipline. So by not killing, not stealing, no sexual misconduct, the 4 kinds of good speech, I would presume, but at least no lying, and then no mental intoxicants. And if she took higher moral discipline, so if she was training beyond the 5 precepts, then of course she's also saying that she hasn't intentionally transgressed. One would assume that she could potentially have been taking 8 precepts, but we don't know for sure. And then the sixth one, sixth astounding quality, is she was saying to Venerable Sariputta, as much as she wants, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, she can enter and dwell in the 4 jhanas. So she actually went through each of the jhanas and expressed them to Venerable Sariputta in the sutta. Now, this is also a remarkable quality, because this is something that we don't often talk about, but as part of the Sekapatipada, one of the accomplishments is being able to access 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th jhanas, to be accomplished in that. And the Arahants have this. And so in her case, she could at will enter and dwell in the 4 jhanas. And so that is how you train that your mind doesn't shake. So the fact that she's very skilled, very similar to this Uttara Nanda Mata, who was foremost at the 4 jhanas, you can see why there are parallels given between both these women. So this is quite an accomplishment. Now, most people either don't know about the jhanas, or they struggle to get to the jhanas because they're not following insight pathways, or they use temporary keys or things to try and access the jhanas, but at some point they break down because it's not the way that the Buddha taught. But when you actually practice in accordance with what the Buddha says in the suttas, or even what the noble arahants tell us in the suttas, it's actually right there, being able to access the 4 jhanas. And of course the Buddha tells us what obstructs these 4 jhanas. And so that's also useful to know when you're actually studying these things. But in the case of Velukantaki, it is such an amazing thing. And when you are actually practicing for Nibbana, you want to be able to access the 4th jhana frequently, because that is the place which you actually are with equanimity. That's where you're not shaken by conditions, you're not shaken by feelings to a certain extent, and or at least you have equanimity towards feelings. So they haven't fully gone away in the fourth jhana, but you actually can actually look at them in the correct way. Now, when it comes to her seventh quality, it says that she has abandoned the 5 lower fetters taught by the Buddha. And so clearly she is announcing that she is an anagami, a non-returner. And so Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana would have been around, and the other bhikkhus would have been around. He was actually, for all these qualities, he was saying, very good, it's marvelous and wonderful, and was expressing much mudita about this. And so we know from this that Velukantaki is actually a very noble being. She's one of the path and fruit lay followers of the Buddha. And so you can see from these qualities, she's definitely someone that we can look up to, someone that we can mold our practice in line with. And clearly, if one is a daughter, if one is a female practitioner, she's someone that you can contemplate and consider and use as your role model. When we look at Velukantaki, Nanda's mother's statement to Venerable Sariputta that she has abandoned the 5 lower fetters, what this really means is that she's abandoned identity view, so that's Sakkaya Ditthi. She's abandoned doubt, which is Vicikicca. She has abandoned misapprehension of virtue and observances, so Silabbata Paramasa. She's abandoned sensual desire, Kamacchanda, and abandoned ill will, which is Bhyapada. So these 5 lower fetters, the Buddha says in the Orambagya Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 45, discourse 179, this noble eightfold path is to be developed for the direct knowledge of these 5 lower fetters, for the full understanding of them, for their utter destruction, for their abandoning. So when Velukantaki, Nanda's mother, makes that declaration, she's really saying that she's not coming back to her mother's womb. And as we know from our examination of the Buddha's teachings, our meditations, we know that she does not misapprehend Kabbalinkara Ahara, the physical nutriment. She knows about the arising and passing away of the 5 aggregates. And she also knows that making contact with the physical nutriment, with form, there is nothing in the feelings. And that's why her mind doesn't shake when it comes to what happened with her son, what happened with her husband, and also when she met the Deva king. So there is equanimity in her practice. Clearly with the 4 jhanas, her mind has been trained not to shake. So she's a very inspirational role model, that if one follows the Buddha's teachings and one practices these meditations, one can attain the jhanas at will. It's very helpful in everyday life for the rest of our lives until we complete this journey, to not allow the mind to shake. Now, what I find most useful in this is that at the point of her death, her mind will not shake. And that is what we all aspire to, because when our mind has the ability to shake because of feeling or because of changing of conditions, we are at greater risk at the time of death. And without practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, it's even worse. But if one develops the Noble Eightfold Path and one is similar to Velukantaki, where the mind does not shake, then this makes it less risky at the time of death. So knowing that there is someone like Velukantaki, Nanda's mother, it's such a uplifting feeling. And so when Buddha calls her, as well as Khujjutara Upasika, role models for our daughters, as female practitioners, it's very important to see that this is someone of very noble practice and someone of very astounding qualities. And so there's much we can learn from in terms of taking someone like Velukantaki, Nanda's mother, as our role model. The Chalangadana Sutta in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 6, discourse number 37, is the other sutta where Velukantaki, Nanda's mother, appears. And the background to this sutta is that the Buddha is in Savatthi, while Venerable Mahamokkallana and Venerable Sariputta and a Sangha of bhikkhus is actually in Velukantaka. So with his divine eye, the Buddha could see that Velukantaki, Nanda's mother, was about to prepare and offer a dana to the Sangha that fulfilled 6 factors, which was very meritorious. And so the Buddha gave a teaching and he said, and how is an offering possessed of 6 factors? Here the donor has 3 factors and the recipients have 3 factors. What are the 3 factors of the donor? The donor is joyful before giving. The donor has a placid, confident mind in the act of giving. And the donor is elated after giving. These are the 3 factors of the donor. Then the Buddha goes on and says, what are the 3 factors of the recipients? Here, the recipients are devoid of lust or are practicing to remove lust. The recipients are devoid of hatred or are practicing to remove hatred. And the recipients are devoid of delusion or are practicing to remove delusion. These are the 3 factors of the recipients. And so then the Buddha goes on to say, it's not easy to measure the merit of such an offering thus. Just so much is the stream of merit, stream of the wholesome, nutriment of happiness, heavenly, ripening in happiness, conducive to heaven, that leads to what is wished for, desired, and agreeable to one's welfare and happiness. Rather, it is reckoned simply as an incalculable, immeasurable great mass of merit. So the Buddha goes on to talk about a simile. The Buddha says, because just as it is not easy to measure the water in the great ocean thus, there are so many gallons of water, or there are so many hundreds of gallons of water, or there are so many thousands of gallons of water, or there are so many hundreds of thousands of gallons of water, but rather it is reckoned simply as an incalculable, immeasurable great mass of water. So too, it is not easy to measure the merit of such an offering. And then the Buddha ends with this final 4 verses. Prior to giving, one is joyful. While giving, one settles the mind in trust. After giving, one is elated. This is success in the act of offering. When they are devoid of lust and hatred, devoid of delusion, without taints, self-controlled, living the spiritual life, the field for the offering is complete. Having cleansed oneself and given with one's own hands, the act of charity is very fruitful for oneself and in relation to others. Having performed such a charitable deed with a mind free from stinginess, the wise person, rich in faith or conviction, is reborn in a happy, non-afflictive world. So there is much Dhamma in this particular sutta, and a few things that are important to point out. So the first, obviously, we need to look at the 3 factors of the donor, which clearly Velukantaki definitely has. So one is joyful before giving. So that means one doesn't have thoughts of stinginess, ill will, thoughts of harm, any of those things that prevent one from being joyful. If you have resentment, stinginess, divisiveness, all the defilements in the mind, then it doesn't fulfill the first quality. One needs to want to give, that one knows that the act of giving is very meritorious and it leans towards Nibbana. So the second one is that while you are giving, there is a placid and confident mind in the act of giving. So the Buddha does talk about the mind being settled in trust in the verses that were read out at the end. What the Buddha means by that is you have conviction towards Buddha Dhamma Sangha. You have conviction that there are noble arahants, that the Buddha was perfectly enlightened. And so when you're making the offering, particularly if you're making an offering to people that practice both lay and monastic Sangha, because it is the fourfold Sangha. So if these recipients have path and fruit, then of course when we look at recipients, you know that they're practicing for freedom from lust or greed, hatred and delusion, or they have abandoned greed, hatred and delusion, then you have trust in that. You have trust that there are beings who have path and fruit. So in the act of giving, then that is also what is in the mind, that there isn't any doubt. So that's how it fulfills it. There is no doubt. There's complete conviction in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, or conviction to the extent that one has it. At least with right view. If there's right view in the act of giving, then it fulfills it, because when you have right view, there's no doubt. The third one for the donor is that one is elated after giving. So you don't suffer the effects of regretting. There's no regrets about the giving. You don't think back and you think, oh, I shouldn't have given the best food, or I shouldn't have done this, or etc., etc. There is no doubt even with that. And so one is just completely joyful at the act of giving, because there's complete relinquishment after giving. So those are the three factors for donors. And then the three factors for recipients are really around being devoid of lust or greed, hatred and delusion. And if not so, the Buddha also includes that one is practicing to remove lust, hatred and delusion. So that fulfills the 6 qualities. And so in this way, the Buddha then goes on to say, the merit that one makes from this is incalculable, immeasurable, and incalculable and immeasurable, a great mass of merit. From our examination of Velukantaki Nanda's mother, it's very clear that she's a wonderful role model and quite astounding in terms of the qualities. And in many ways, when we think about who we can mold ourselves along, particularly female lay practitioners, because that's what the Buddha has recommended, then we know someone like Velukantaki Nanda's mother is someone very special, just like Khujjutara Upasika and other female lay disciples that the Buddha has praised. So in the case of Velukantaki, clearly she's a non-returner, and so clearly it is possible. And so that in itself is very inspirational, that it is possible for a lay person, a lay woman, to do these things, to develop path and fruit. And also she has helped us in terms of the act of giving, that when it comes to giving in the correct way, from the beginning, the middle and the end, one needs to have the right view and one needs to have the right practice of that view. So in terms of before giving, one has to be joyful that one doesn't have stinginess, doesn't have any of the mental defilements when it comes to the actual act of giving, the process of giving. You do that with complete conviction in Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And in terms of after giving, one has no regrets. And so when you know this explicitly, then this is how we can give, and this is also how we can share the merit with all sentient beings. So in Velukantaki's case, she was probably looked favorably on by the Devas because she was one that was not stingy about dedicating merits to the Devas. So in the same way, we can also do the same thing, to include Devas in our acts of generosity, in our acts of giving. And to remember that if we suffer in this lifetime, and all of us know that we do, then it's also the same for beings in all other realms. So in any meritorious thing that we do, we share it with all living beings, the goodness of it, the merit of it. And so when we look at Velukantaki, there is so much there. Even though she doesn't appear widely in the suttas, there is a lot there to reflect upon in the way that her mind doesn't shake, in her ability with the jhanas, in her morality, in her virtue, and in her path and fruit. So we'll leave the session here. Let's share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and well. Blessings of the Triple Gem, wishing you all well. Teruan Saranai.